So thank you very much, Katharine, for joining us today. Welcome to TPA Full Disclosure series. Katharine, for the benefit of our audience, can you introduce yourself and tell our viewers who you are, what you do, and your interest in transparency, accountability, and civic participation?
Hi, yes, thank you for inviting me to take part in the series. So I'm Katharine Knox. I'm the Power and Accountability Programme Manager for the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. The Charitable Trust is a foundation based in the UK that works on a number of issues trying to address the causes of injustice and conflict, and then to tackle the root causes. So that the area I work on is specifically around issues of power and accountability, relating to democracy, corporate accountability, and the functioning of the media.
Okay. So how about you? Tell us, how was your journey into working around transparency, participation, and civic and accountability? Was it accidental or was it a deliberate move? Perhaps maybe you are passionate about it, or was it something you developed interest in later on?
So I guess my background is in social policy and research, and I've kind of done work on a number of issues, particularly around climate change and human rights issues and issues of climate justice. And I guess some of that work makes you realise that actually some of the underpinning issues around the functioning of our democracy, how the government works, and issues of how corporations work are actually fairly fundamental in terms of addressing those wider social change agendas. So we need a healthy and thriving democracy in order to tackle issues like human rights, social justice, climate change. And corporations have huge power now, often very influential over our political arenas. So without thinking about issues of corporate accountability, again, we may find it harder to address some of the wider social change concerns that we have.
Great. So you currently lead the Power and Accountability Program at JRCT. So how are you responding to the effect of the pandemic in the face of growing repression around democratic reforms, as well as systemic racism?
So JRCT has been very alive to these issues. So in terms of how our organisation has supported people, we provided some additional funding to some of our existing grantees just to help them tide them through the pandemic when times were particularly challenging at the beginning of the pandemic and people's work was thrown and people weren't sure what they would be able to do. We've also opened up new funding streams and priorities in the funding that we do across all our programmes around COVID and systemic racism, the sort of big issues of our time and issues that intersect with our other concerns. So we have opened up new funding opportunities, and we obviously are very concerned about some of the issues that are arising. If you look in terms of democracy, our parliamentary processes haven't been running as normal, with everything moving online, that's actually been problematic in terms of political scrutiny. And we know that the government's been forced to bring in regulations quickly at times to respond to the emergency, but that has limited the opportunity to discuss and scrutinise what those changes are in Parliament and then more generally by the public. So that's obviously raised a lot of concerns. And we can see other issues that have arisen in relation to public procurement, the general responses that we've had, so lots of issues that require, I think, more accountability and transparency.
Okay. Yeah, and also climate justice is also gaining momentum post-COVID as countries prepare to build back better. And I know that you have worked quite extensively on climate change. So my question is, what lessons, as the fight for climate justice gain more momentum, what lessons do you think you have gathered over the years that could be important for policymakers, CSOs who are working around climate justice today?
So I guess my background is coming from kind of interest in the policy and research questions arising and the importance of having a strong evidence base for action. And I've been involved in sort of lots of research funding in that space, and particularly in the issues around climate justice in the UK. I think when I was working on that in the past, one of the issues is that climate justice is very much a global issue, but it wasn't very well understood actually within a developed world, a developed country, what that meant and what the issues might be. And what we did was explore some of the issues for the UK. And actually it points to the fact that even in a country like the UK, there are enormous issues of justice and equity that climate change brings. So there's a triple injustice where basically poor and disadvantaged groups are paying more proportionally towards some of the policy responses, benefiting less from those while also being more impacted by climate change. And that's what our research uncovered. So we basically have tried to expose some of those issues to greater scrutiny. But I think what the work demonstrated was, my experience has shown is, evidence is not sufficient. So we've had all sorts of evidence over the years from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the UK. We have the Committee on Climate Change producing very compelling reports about the nature of the problems and the issues that we need to confront. But we have a lot of vested interests that we're up against, and what we need is a combination of approaches coming together in a range of tools. So it is also about movement building. It is also about coalition building across different interests. So recognising, not just the role of more traditional NGOs, but also that grassroots organising. So when we look at Fridays for the Future initiatives and the role of Greta Thunberg, there are big leaders out there as well. David Attenborough's played an important role, I think, in bringing awareness to the issues. But we need to sort of combine these different elements, and Extinction Rebellion obviously has played a very important role as well, increasing public pressure. But we need to bring these different things together. And obviously what we need is then governments to be responding and organisations to be responding to the challenge. And I think we've seen that there are kind of opportunities and there are examples of where citizens themselves are engaging in the deliberations needed about what actions need to be taken. So we've had the citizens' assemblies in the UK, and people will come to solutions that are needed when they're given the information and given the chance to discuss and understand and explore those issues. So there's a lot of possibility, and I think the problem is that climate change is hitting us now. As we can see all around the world, there are lots of examples of increases in extreme weather events that are, having massive impacts on people. And that's the most extreme sort of impacts of climate change from weather, but there are many other impacts that are going to come in terms of food insecurity and other things, climate-related migration. Some of those things are happening now. And I think, part of the challenge with climate change is that it's being seen as something distant, something abstract, something sort of in the future or over there. And actually, it's a very much present day issue, impacting now in a concrete way. And so, we need to be acting now, and the urgency of this is really critical.
Great. So you've explained more about participation around climate justice. So from sharing this lesson and from your experience, how is this working with the current work that you are doing now at JRCT? I mean, with the Power and Accountability Program. How does the lesson from using civic participation to push the issue of climate justice forward, how is it reflecting in programs that you handle now around power and accountability?
So we do fund specific organisations working in this space in our programme, and one example is Involve, who are one of the leading organisations in relation to participation and deliberative democracy in the UK, and they've been actively involved in convening the citizens' assemblies, both working with a government-led initiative, but also local council-led initiatives to engage citizens. And so we're supporting their work. And we support another organisation called Hope for the Future, which is working to engage MPs on climate change issues. And their approach is very much working with people in terms of where they're at and what their interests are, and building relationships and then understanding where the opportunities for influence are. So rather than coming with a pre-established agenda and pushing particular messages, it's sort of about understanding where politicians are at, what concerns they have, what interests they have, and where the points of connection are, which is a bit of a different approach and has been shown to have some positive impacts in terms of some of the work they've been doing on policy change.
Great.
And those are two examples. I think another example is we fund Share Action. So they're an organisation that pushes for responsible investment practices, and they're very much working to try and get investors to use their power in working with companies to support a shift towards a just transition to address climate change. So if we look at some of the things they've been doing, they've been active in supporting shareholder activism so that shareholders can engage companies about their practices. And most recently, in an example, there's a big action around HSBC and their investments in fossil fuels, which led to some successful movement by HSB in terms of its commitment to phase out funding in relation to coal, with details to kind of be worked through. But I think that's a good example of investor power being used to support the climate transition.
Great, thank you, Katharine. For people who are looking to work more in this area, I mean, in areas of on issue around transparency, participation, climate justice, looking back at when you first started, what do you wish you knew when you first started, and what advice will you pass along to people who are starting out? What mistake would you want them to make, perhaps?
I suppose perhaps one of the big learning points for me has been that to address an issue you're very passionate about, and in my case, climate change and climate justice issues, actually you have to look at the wider infrastructure in which you're working. So those issues of, what is the kind of governance system we're in, how are governments working, within your own country and internationally on these issues, and where are the points of influence, and that I guess as well that the kind of evidence-based approach is not enough. So, for someone who with a research background, very committed to understanding the evidence and exploring what the issues are, but there's a lot of activism and campaigning and movement building to be done around that to actually try and make a difference. So I think it's about understanding the different parts of the field and the infrastructure around you, really, and trying to join the dots. And there's a lot of need, I think, across social change agendas to build connections with others, to understand the links between agendas. No issue is really a single issue. Everything's interconnected. So understanding some of that and seeing what those points are. And I think finding where your niche is, where your kind of contribution can be. So it may not be, maybe in a number of roles, I suppose, or a number of different ways. And it may not be what you immediately think, but, so I've moved from a research role into a funding role, and there are different opportunities and things you can do in those different spaces.
Great. Thank you so much for your advice, Katharine. I'm sure many people will find it useful as they carry along. Even people who have been in the field for a while will find something to hold on to from what you have said. And so finally, Katharine, before you go, we know it's summer, so we usually have this fun question to wrap up the segment. So since it is the summer, if money or time is not a problem, what will you be doing all day?
Well, one thing I would love to be doing this summer, which may not be possible, is returning to the place where I went to university. It's 30 years since I went to university, and there's a lot of old friends I haven't seen for a long time due to the pandemic, and so a reunion would be a nice thing to do. Whether or not we'll manage it, I'm not sure this year, but other than that, I think just having have a chance to catch up with family and friends is important while we can, with the different situation we're now in with the lockdown, hopefully we'll be able to do more of that over the summer, which should be good.
Great. I'm sure perhaps by this time next year, we might not be able to do that at our own free without considering the pandemic. Thank you so much for your time, Katharine.
Thank you.